Land has become a contentious issue in Cambodia, with cities growing. The poor are paying a high price. They face forceful relocation, beaten up, or imprisoned for standing up and fight back. Tim Sorel, professor from University of Florida, has documented work of some land activists in his Trap of Saving Cambodia, and is here today to discuss more about his documentary, to be released soon. Hi Tim, thank you for being here, and can you tell me when will your film release?
Well, the film is now on the festival circuit, and I find that this is probably the best way to start to get some early publicity for the film, to be in festivals in several different countries, in hopes that we can find a distributor like a Netflix or a Blockbuster, somebody that would be willing to put this type of documentary online so that people can more access it.
So why Saving Cambodia is a trap?
You know, the title of the film actually came as a thought process to one of the questions from the wonderful author who I know you're familiar with, Elizabeth Becker. And she described there's many people who start NGOs in Cambodia. Of course, there's over 1,000 NGOs, and I think I've heard the number 2,000 NGOs working in Cambodia. And she said people often go to Cambodia with the thoughts that they are going to save it, okay? And she cautioned me in the interview, and she said, you know, you have to be careful of falling into the trap of saving Cambodia. All right, there are very many political things happening in Cambodia, and I think for a lot of the NGOs that go into there and think that they're going to be able to change the world, they're faced with a very harsh reality of the current political situation there. I want to share one story if I could.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I've been working for an NGO since 2004. I've gone into Cambodia many times to make not only films, but to work on a water well project. About a year into working on the water wells, I found out that as part of the process of trying to put in clean water for the poor and impoverished in rural Cambodia, that we as an NGO had to pay a bribe. We had to pay government officials in order to continue to give water to poor people, and I was absolutely shocked by this. So that's kind of how I started on this process of trying to make this documentary about what is really taking place on the ground in Cambodia.
So who is to blame for that? It's the government or the NGO who trying to help the people?
I think it's both. That's a great question. I think that the whole government system, as David Pred puts it in my film, is a carrot of carrots and sticks. Each person in Cambodia is sort of lulled into a sense of a certain behavior, and if they behave a certain way, then the government will reward them. And so that whole system of bribery, of payouts to government officials, is just really embedded in the overall cultural the culture of Cambodia. That's one. Two, the NGOs who say that they're sticking up for human rights, yet they pay those bribes, they just kind of fuel that whole system. And so they perpetuate that. But there are NGOs today that are starting to stand up and say, no, we're no longer going to pay bribes so that we can go out and help Cambodia's poor. It's absurd.
So how hard they kind of standing up to do this in order to provide this service to the people, and at the same time, you know, trying to do the right thing for the people, so, and to ensure that they have their existence in the country.
Well, I think that's part of the problem.
Thanks for sharing your documentary with me to preview in advance. And in your documentary, you start with a land protest. Can you tell me more about that?
There was a group that was protesting the series of barricades going up around Bongkak Lake area in order to intimidate the residents there. And they were protesting the boarding of that area in order to scare the residents into perhaps abandoning that area early, to taking a quick payout. And so a very small group of Cambodians, there might have been 6 or 7, had a very, very mild protest, and they were very quickly stopped by the police and told to move on, and that they were threatened with arrest. And so this is very, very culture in Cambodia that the citizens are very, very afraid to protest. In fact, there's been special laws put into place, incitement laws, that are now really, really closing the democratic space.
So how serious is the issue right now?
Of
the land issue and then
well, I think it's a very, very serious issue. I mean, people can be thrown off their land because some type of foreign investor wants to come in and build a casino. You know, so the land grabbing is an issue. The way that those particular new owners come about their land titles is illegal, one, but two, people being herded like cattle onto trucks, driven 20 miles outside the city and dropped in a rice paddy. You know, there's just something so wrong with that. It's been widely documented, the forced evictions, but I think that where my film goes is I actually followed those victims of forced eviction out to the areas that they live in, and I spoke with them and I showed the conditions. So I think that's something that this film does that I don't think a lot of other films have done, have followed what happens to those people when they have been forcibly evicted. So yes, it's a very serious concern.
At the same time, you see hundreds of millions of dollars of aid money flowing into the country. How effective that is?
I think that I want to be careful how I say this, because I think there are certain dollars that come in from partner countries that do a lot of good, that do work towards feeding the hungry, towards health programs, AIDS programs. I do think there are dollars, but there are a lot of dollars that nobody really understands where they go. There's no transparency. And we've read a couple times where the World Bank has had to shut off loans because there is no transparency to where a lot of that money is going. There's a lot of nepotism, forced contracts, and so the dollars that are meant to get to the poor and the impoverished never quite get there because they're being tied up in this system of corruption. And
people locally live with that, or they try to fight back sometimes?
That's the problem. How can they? How can they stand up? All right. If you cannot have a meeting, if you cannot have a protest, how can they? How can they fight back against that? That's the problem.
So because the money tend to go to those who manage the project.
Very much so. A lot of this foreign aid is going to the elite. And that are using that money to enrich their own lives and the lives of their families, not going to the average Cambodian that really needs it.
Aid money being used, but how do you think about that kind of development assistance?
That aid or that foreign investment is coming in, it's helping development, but there's no growth, and no water, no services, no housing.
Politicians and observers warn that if these trends continue, there would be kind of a revolution or uprising where people would stand up. How is that possible?
Right now, I don't think it is possible. I think that the Cambodian People's Party has such a strong hold on all things political and all things power in the police, that it's possible for current day Cambodians to organize in order to create this revolution that you speak of. I think that it's going to take something major for them. That's one. Two, I think that anybody over the age of, let's say, 35 has been somewhat affected by the genocide at the hands of the Khmer Rouge. And honestly, I think that the citizens are very tired. They're exhausted. And they just want to have peace and quiet in their lives right now. So I don't think that there's enough spirit, if you will, right now in current day Cambodia to have that kind of civil uprising like you mentioned, but that probably is what it's going to take. And I think that I mentioned that towards the end of the film. The film concludes with my subjects kind of making that statement, that it's probably going to be the younger generation that uses the internet, that watches broadcasts like this to say, we can be part of a change. But I do think it's a lot of years coming. I want to say it's going to be better than 20 years before I think that you will see some kind of major change in power in Cambodia.
In your documentary also you talk to, I don't want to mention his name, someone who already left Cambodia and lived in the US, but still show his fear toward how the system was managed. So, but at every election, the ruling party is getting better and better from one election to another. Is there any reason why they do this? They do better because they actually do the thing that local people really want, or is it what you just mentioned alone that keep them in power?
Well, this is what I know, and I won't claim to be an expert in local election politics in Cambodia. In the cities, I do think that opposing parties are fairly well organized and they can communicate. Out in the rural areas of Cambodia, out in the countryside, I think that the Cambodian People's Party is very strong out there. So I think that the ruling party right now does enough to provide, basic services to try to keep the people happy. The one thing you have to say about the Cambodian People's Party is that they don't always agree with each other, but they work very well together to make sure that they keep a very strong hold on Cambodia. And I think that's why you're seeing that election after election after election, it's just a tidal wave of support for the Cambodian People's Party. Conversely, the party's gotten very smart. They have managed to pass several new laws that really force opposition parties into jail terms, as we've seen with Sam Ramsey, that for anybody that does speak out against the ruling party. So they've gotten very clever in the way that they've passed legislation to jail people who speak out. So it's nearly impossible for an opposing party to really get their message out there in any meaningful way.
Thank you so much, Tim, for coming in and talk to VOA about your documentary. We have just spoken to Tim Sorel, professor from University of Florida, on his documentary Trap of Saving Cambodia. Thank you so much for watching.